G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Condensation. I'll wipe the dust off. And you can clearly see the beads, water droplets, on the inside of the lens. None here, quite a lot there, and down here, if we apply the moist rag, or moist toilet paper, there we have just a little bit of condensation. Not a lot, but a bit. And if we look down here, we can just barely see a water line running along there. And you can also just barely see, off above the point of my finger, there's a tiny little hole and there's a bit of a toothpick. And the toothpick is wet. It's a porous plug. Here on the front corner of the car, once again, condensation on the inside of the lens. The condensation is only in the lights on this side of the car. There is no condensation on the inside of the lens here on the, what amounts to the southern side of the car. See where the shade is? Just a little tiny bit of condensation up here, none there, and of course this has got a plastic mastic repair which apparently is also porous, and it allows water to leak out of it. So I've had this car for about 6 years, and about 2 years ago it blew a tail light. So I took it to my son, the auto electrician, and I got a new tail light bulb for $5. It's a combination tail light and stop light, which has electrical connections on both sides of it. I put that in, which is not a difficult procedure. That's the blinker light, that's the stop light and the tail light, and that's what they're supposed to look like. And as you can see, there's still a little bit of condensation on the plug. So where's the water coming from? Well, I told you the answer, it's condensation. This is the northeast corner of the car. Sun comes up in the morning, sun shines on that corner of the car. Red absorbs infrared, i.e. heat, a lot better than does a clear glass over a silver reflector. So during the day, the air behind this gets hotter than the air behind that, but the air behind that gets pretty hot anyway, and the hot air expands, and the expanding hot air comes out through the holes in the light fitting. They're not hermetically sealed, and the hot air sits there all day, car's warmed up, and then the sun goes down. When the sun goes down, the metal and glass car acts as a heat sink and radiates what heat it can, either to the air or straight out to space. And the air behind the perspex glasses, that air gets nicely cold. Oh look, I just knocked off. And it's coming down. I didn't realise that the two chambers were connected in such a fashion that they can leak like that. These drops over here are small enough that their surface tension is sticking them to the glass. These drops over here were big enough that they were able to come off. So, this is still generating water, this is still generating water. The water comes down. There's a bit of a runnel there. There's a bit of a runnel and a blob just there. See there? And the water has been collecting down in here. It's been collecting down in here to the point where as you accelerate, decelerate, wobble or go over a bump, this water's been sloshing around and splashing. And if it's night time and you got your tail lights on because you got your headlights on, therefore brightly glows the filaments, causing the glass to be hot. And when the cold water hits the hot glass, bingo, it cracks. And when it cracks, the air gets in, and when the air gets in, the filament burns out and you've no longer got a light bulb. And this is the third light bulb that it's busted that way in about 2 years. And it took 2 years during the drought, I might add, when humidity was low, down around 10 to 20%. But this past year we've had high humidities up around the 60% or so. And the more humid air during the La Nina, it's been making enough water to actually break 3 bloody light bulbs before Muggins here figured out that the cure is to drill up at about that angle with the smallest drill bit you've got, let the water drain, and then put a wooden plug in there. If you just leave the hole, what's going to happen is as you're driving, dust is going to get sucked in there, coming off that wheelie looking thing there on dirt roads. So you need something that'll allow the water to drain. You need the hole to be at the correct angle, and then you need to plug the hole with a porous plug. So condensation, I hope I've got you beaten. All fixed. There we go. A happy condensation story. One in happy contradistinction to my condensation theory, which suggested that this black polypipe, 32 millimeters in diameter, would heat up during the day and the air would expand, and then in the night it would suck in cold air, and then it would condense water, and then you could be able to come along and you'd be able to collect the water, which it was fantasized was being harvested from the atmosphere by condensation, thus inspiring the fantasy that this 5 metre spare length of polypipe, if it was joined up to about another 11 or 12 of them, maybe 14 of them, could form a great big teepee with a collection ring at the bottom, so that all the water could be collected. And during times of drought you might get, just a little bit of drinkable water condensed from the atmosphere by passive solar power. However, that was on the basis of undoing this Stort's cap basically just before I ever wanted to use the sprinkler, and what I came to the conclusion of was that this was condensing enough water to be possibly useful. However, that was on the basis of sporadic measurements When I looked at figures for a month, they were disappointingly low, and when I started taking daily measurements of how much water was produced, on cold starry nights when you would expect the system to be working well, it produced nothing. When you had fog and drizzle, it produced something, and when you had steady rain all night, that's when there was impressive amounts of water behind the Stort's cap. So as apparently unlikely as it seemed at first assumption, the water in that 32mm polypipe stacking up on top of the Stort's cap is actually coming in through those two 30-degree angled nozzles, which have tiny weeny little holes in them, you know, like it's a 25mm sprinkler, but that indicates the size of the entrance going into them. But yeah, two little tiny weeny orifices, 60 degrees to the vertical, 30 to the horizontal, and that's where the water was coming from when it rained. So the whole idea of having passive solar water harvested from the atmosphere was just bullshit. Whereas on the other hand, if you park your car in the same place, the same orientation every day, if the relative humidity is much above 50%, then you can indeed condense sufficient water inside your tail lights that when you go over bumps at night, you're going to be busting your bloody light bulbs. You can't say you haven't been warned. You also can't say that you haven't been told how to cure the phenomenon. Was I be not as silly as I looks? Hey, for a hillbilly, warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.